Oh, ready? Okay, here we go. 9:09 a.m. Welcome to the 9 a.m. Public hearing for the budget. Public hearing is to hear public testimony. Well, first, before I begin, I'm going to do some introductions. To my left is Commissioner Gary Edwards, and in the center on the phone is Commissioner Bud Blake. I'm Commissioner John Hutchings. To my right is La Bonita Bomar, Clerk of the Board. To her right is Ramiro Chavez, the County Manager, and to his right is Robin Campbell, the Assistant County Manager and Budget Director. And so the public hearing is to hear public testimony regarding the revenue sources to support the preliminary Thurston County 2019-2020 biennial operating and capital budgets, including property tax revenues and levy increase. The purpose of the public hearings scheduled today, Thursday, November 29 at 9 a.m., is to be briefed on the revenue source assumptions related to Thurston County's preliminary 2019-2020 biennial operating and capital budgets. The preliminary budget was published online November 19th, 2018, and has been available to the public pursuant to public notice since that date, both online and printed. This public hearing is in accordance with RCW 84.55.120, Taxing Districts Revenue Sources Adoption of Tax Increase by Ordinance or Resolution. There is a sign-in sheet in the back. Please avail yourself to that and sign in if you wish to testify with your name. And when we get to that point, I will call you forward by the roster, and you'll have 3 minutes in which to give testimony to the board. I will be calling out the names for oral testimony, and your time, if you choose to speak, cannot be given to another person. Public hearing is to consider the preliminary revenue assumptions for biennial and capital budgets as drafted for 2019 and 2020. So I hereby open up the public hearing. We'll start with a presentation from Robin Campbell. She'll present the PowerPoint presentation on revenue assumptions. Robin.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I would like to begin this presentation on the budget by thanking our staff. People across the county have worked very hard on preparing the budget, including making estimates on revenue. Projecting revenue is never an easy thing, and when we asked people in June of 2018 to predict how much they're going to collect in 2.5 years, that is somewhat of a daunting task and requires a crystal ball. So I really appreciate everyone in the county who has worked on forecasts and entered information into our system. I especially want to thank the budget staff, Denise, Michelle, Teresa, Mark, and Lisa. We had assistance from Lisa Johnson this year. Without them, we would not have a presentation this morning. So I especially appreciate all of the staff. So as you said, today we are hearing about revenue, and state law requires, well, before I even talk about the state laws, let's see if I can make this work. Here is just a very broad overview of the preliminary budget that was published last week. Are we good? Huh, that's not working. I'm going to ignore that. We are on page 2 of the handout while someone figures out why the PowerPoint on the screen isn't following along. And I don't know who we have that can do that, but thank you, Michelle. We're looking for Lisa. Yep. So what you would see if the screen was working is that revenue and expenditures are displayed for 2019 and 2020 at an extremely high level. The different types of funds are listed: general fund, special revenue, enterprise, internal service, capital project, and debt and bond funds. And what you see in most of these, thank you, Lisa, is that the Expenditures, in most cases, exceed the anticipated revenue. And what's going on there is you'll hear more about when we have the public hearings on the budget next week, is we have substantial fund balance in many of our funds. We're spending down. That is especially true in the special revenue and the enterprise funds. In the general fund, we are also spending down fund balance. Yay, it's working now. Thank you very much. And in the general fund, it's a little more problematic, but we do have money to spend, and the board has proposed this budget that is using part of that fund balance. So this is just a broad overview. As you had said, thank you. State law requires a public hearing on the revenue, specifically on revenue that supports the budget. So that's what we're doing today. State law also requires that the hearing is focused on the property tax and any changes in the levy. So I have quite a bit of information for you today about the property tax levy. And you'll have to certify that levy before November 30th, which is why we're meeting later this afternoon to consider certifying the levy for the assessor. So what we'll do today is I'll talk about how property tax is calculated. We'll look at the revenue in the 13 largest county funds and talk about specific changes in taxes and fees. So we'll start with the general fund. It's the single largest fund in the county. The tax total operating revenue, taxes is of course the largest part. The charges for goods and services, operating transfers, intergovernmental revenues, and then other, which encompasses quite a few things, totals almost $294 million in revenue in 2019 and $298 million in 2020. As you see again, total operating expenditures exceed the amount of revenue anticipated, and we'll get more into that next week. To break down the revenue in the general fund, here are some of the examples of what each of those categories are. Taxes are property taxes, sales taxes, and special revenue taxes. Charges for services include things like payment from the state for mental health services, garbage disposal fees at the WARC are charges for services, and we also have internal service charges like financial services. Basically, charges for services is when the user pays a fee of some type in exchange for a specific government service. Intergovernmental revenues, for the most part, are federal and state grants for things like roads and housing, and state revenue sharing, such as the state shares the liquor profits and the marijuana profits with local jurisdictions across the state, so we record our share as an intergovernmental revenue. Operating transfers are where we move money from one account to the other. So you'll see operating transfers in many of our funds. One example is the road fund collects all of the taxes, and then part of those taxes are transferred to the construction fund for roads. So you see an operating transfer that's recorded as a revenue according to state accounting rules. And then, sure.
I'm just thinking, the budget's been online and posted.
Yes.
PowerPoint online so people can follow along or see it as well.
So it is up.
Is it on our
I
website?
understand that this PowerPoint is this. It's not on the web yet. Okay.
I just want to be sure it is eventually.
Right. It will definitely be available by the end of the day today.
Good. Thank you.
Right. So the other types of revenue, there's a wide variety of other types of revenue that the county receives. Here are just a few examples: marriage and vehicle licenses, all types of licenses, construction permits, court fines are a type of revenue that the county collects, and then we have investment interest. So there is a very, very broad variety of revenues. In the general fund alone, there are over 300 account lines that we track as revenue coming into the general fund, and every fund has a wide variety of revenue that they collect. The property tax is the single largest source of fund revenue into the general fund. And people pay their property tax to the county treasurer. They get a notice from the county assessor, they pay the county treasurer, but the county does not retain all of the property tax that's collected. And as you see on this slide, the county only keeps 9.5 cents from every dollar that is collected. 9.5 cents goes into the county's general fund. We retain not quite 5 cents in the road district. 2.5 cents goes to Medic 1, and 1/3 of 1 cent goes to conservation futures out of the property tax payment. But the largest share goes to the state and schools. So 60 cents off every dollar goes straight to the state of Washington and schools. The remaining go to other jurisdictions within the county. We serve as the collection agent, but we certainly don't keep all the money. Mm-hmm. And this used to, just as 2 years ago, the county retained 11 cents off every dollar. And that amount has gone down due to changes in the state legislature, where a larger share of the property taxes goes to the state and the schools to fund the McCleary decision. Sales tax is up. It has been on an upward trend since 2012. Prior to that, of course, we were in the Great Recession, where sales tax revenue was flat. I don't have handy the amount that was collected in 2008, but I know that 10.7 million was less than we collected in 2008. Sales tax remained flat for about 4 years and then started to grow. And it is now growing at an extremely fast pace. We have not seen this rate of growth since about 15 years ago. We saw this type of growth, so it really is quite phenomenal. And you may have seen in the newspaper recently that Thurston County's tax growth was 5%. Well, I'm not sure what section that was of the county, because the sales tax receipts in Thurston County in the general fund have been 9.6%. Compared to last year at this time. We're collecting almost 10% more than we did. And even though you see in 2018, we budgeted $16.3 million in sales tax this year, based on the most recent forecast, we will possibly collect as much as $17 million this year. So we are way ahead of the original budget projections in sales tax. We have accounted for that in the forecast that you took into consideration at the time you approved the budget. And just sales tax growth has been pretty phenomenal. It can't, of course, continue forever at that rate. All of the economists are saying that we're getting close to the next economic downturn. But for now, sales tax is growing like crazy. The strongest sector, of course, is retail trade. And you'll see on the next graph that, and I'm just going to go to the next graph instead of looking at this page full of numbers. Let's look at the graph. You see the retail trade is not only the highest sector that we collect tax from, but it also is growing at the fastest rate, with construction being close behind. We receive about $1 million from accommodation and food services. Then the information and communications sector, wholesale trade, and then all the other sectors combined make up the rest, but really it's strongest in retail and construction. And what that tells us is that when the next economic downturn comes, construction and retail are the markets that soften the fastest and drop the most. So that's where we are vulnerable in the future. But again, for now, it's still growing at a phenomenal rate. Here is the general fund revenue, and the we'll break down taxes a little more on the next slide. Charges for goods and services are about 14.6 million. Intergovernmental revenues around 9 million. All other adds up to around $9 million and is anticipated to grow according to the offices and departments that entered the revenue estimates into our system. Again, total operating expenditures are anticipated to be higher. One of the things that you see in the general fund in particular is the numbers in the system and the numbers in the forecast that you'll look at next week are a little different. That's because revenue estimates tend to be a little bit conservative. As a county, we collect a little more in revenue than we budget. And in expenditures, we tend to spend 3 to 5% less than we budget every year. We expect that trend to continue. That will help to close the gap between revenue and expenditures. And again, we'll talk more about that when we do the public hearings next week. Here's the breakdown of the general fund revenue. Property tax is anticipated to be 41.3 million in 2019, 42.2 million in 2020. That assumes a 1% levy increase, which the board is allowed to raise by law without a vote. And it also includes assumptions about new construction of 10% in the first year and 5% in the second year. On the next slide, you'll see why that is important and how that comes into play. We assume diverted county road property tax of 1.5 million in each year. And criminal justice funding comes from the state. That is about $3 million a year. It's been $3 million a year for ages now, at least the last 8 years. And then other smaller taxes, including a share of sales tax that is collected from the city of Olympia for public safety is about $600,000. Now the property tax levy, it's kind of an interesting and intricate thing because in some cases, a person's property tax is connected to the value of their home, right? And you would think that when the value of your property goes up, your property tax would go up, and that when the property value goes down, the property tax will go down. Well, that's not how it works. So this is just a single snapshot on how property tax is calculated, and you'll see that the value of your property doesn't come into play whatsoever until the very end. So what we do to calculate property tax, and this is how the general fund levy was calculated, we take last year's legal limit levy, which was $83,737,000 and a few dollars, and you multiply that by 1%. So you add $387,000. Then, for new construction, the assessor tells us what the value of new construction in the prior year was. For 2018, new construction is valued at $568,890,000 and odd change, and you multiply that by last year's levy rate. So I look up what that number was and do the math, divide that by 1,000, and in the levy, we add $712,000 to the property tax that we're going to collect. Then the state tells us that the state-owned land is currently worth, in Thurston County, is valued at $41,441,000 and a few dollars. We multiply that by last year's levy rate, divide that by 1,000, and we get to add $51,900 to the levy that we're going to collect. Then the treasurer, the county treasurer, tells us that he's given tax refunds in this year in the amount of $225,000. So we add that to the levy that we can collect for next year. We take all of those calculations, add them together, and that's the highest lawful levy. In that calculation, you can see that at no point did we consider property values of any particular property owner. We divide the new highest lawful levy amount by the assessed value of all property in Thurston County, which the assessor has told us this year is about $35 billion. That is the value of all property in Thurston County. And then you multiply that by 1,000, I think you actually divide that by 1,000, but you get the new levy rate, which now is 1.1446 per $1,000 of value. And that's the rate that is applied to the value of a person's property to figure out how much they owe to the county. Every taxing jurisdiction, except for the schools, goes through this kind of a calculation. So I do this for the general fund, for Medic One, Conservation Futures, and the road fund. And the cities go through this type of a calculation. The county assessor gives us the values to use, and we, away you go. So if someone has a home value that goes down, their property tax is still going to go up because the levy is not necessarily based on property value. It's complicated. We are apparently unique in the nation. No other state does the calculation this way. I don't know why we're so lucky, but this is how property tax is calculated in our state. So that's the calculation we used. To estimate our future amount of tax, I assumed, we went through this calculation, and this is what I plugged in for 2019. To estimate the amount of increase in 2020, I assumed that the board would increase the 1%. I estimated that the value of new construction would increase by 5%, which is a fairly modest increase at this point in time, but in line with what the state of Washington is calculating. We assume that state assessed property would stay the same. We never know what the state will do. and that we don't estimate the refund. But the estimating the amount of new construction, and if you look at these calculations, new construction is where the tax levy grows the most. If new construction goes up, we get a greater increase in our levy. If it drops down, we get less of an increase in our levy. And just as a, again, a point of interest, in 2008, new construction was valued at a little over $1 billion. By 2010, new construction was right around 300 million, so it had dropped by $700 million. You can see how that would affect the amount of property tax increase that the county collects. We are back up to a little over half of $1 billion, so we're growing slowly, but we are nowhere close to pre-recession growth. So that's just something to be aware of. So we'll start now looking at our other major funds. We'll look at about a dozen other funds and talk about where their revenue comes from. In the solid waste fund, the major revenue is from what we call tipping fees. That's the amount of money that's collected when people take their trash to our landfill. And so garbage and solid waste services collect about well over $25 million a year. It's amazing to me how much we collect in tipping fees.
Money making machine.
Yes,
Yeah.
garbage makes the county quite a bit of money. And I speak for the people who seek to reduce solid waste. You know, we would actually like to see this type of revenue go down. But currently we have collections that support the use of our landfill and taking care of all of that waste. We do have an operating transfer from the solid waste reserve into this fund that allows us to do construction projects that we need to do to keep the landfill operational, and then a small amount of other revenue into this fund. It more than covers the operating expenditures from the solid waste fund. In the road and transportation fund, property taxes, again, the largest source of revenue. We're estimating a little over 19 million. This number reflects a road diversion of 1.5 million. It also reflects a levy shift where the state of Washington allows the county to take a part of the road property tax levy and collect it into the general fund instead. We have capacity for that. I'll talk a little more about that in a future slide. But the property tax for the road fund will be right around $19 million in the next 2 years. We also receive fuel tax funding from the state. It is a share of the revenue, and it's a very small amount compared to what people pay at the pump. And I don't have the exact number, and I don't see anyone with us from Public Works who could give us, do you know offhand what that percent is? I don't recall.
Well, it's a very small percentage, and I believe it was less than a quarter
Of 1 cent.
was what we received.
Yeah.
And the allocation to the county is based on the number of miles that we maintain. And that is managed by the County Road Administration Board. And right now, we're managing close to 1,100 lane miles. And based on that is an allocation of the gas tax that comes to the county.
Can you explain what that 1/4 of 1 cent is off of the sale of 1 gallon of gasoline? In
Right.
which the state assesses 49 cents, I
Yeah,
believe.
and
we
there-
get 1/4 of 1 cent. I'd just like to have the public know what minimal amount of funds we're dealing with.
Yeah, there is a federal and a state gas taxes. And out of the state gas tax, only 1 cent is allocated to
1/4 of 1 cent.
1 cent, but 1 cent is allocated to the state transportation, and a quarter of 1 cent is distributed among all the different counties, all the 39 counties of the state. Although we may receive some federal grants as a result of the federal gas tax, but that is a competitive process that we have to go through, not necessarily a direct allocation.
Right. So we receive about $5 million a year off that 1/4 of 1%. So it's not a large amount of money, but we do receive some. And then from other sources, which includes the state and federal grants, we receive about $3 million a year. The total operating revenue this year is a little less than we anticipate spending. Just under $30 million in expenditures. Much of that is for projects. And if we have to, we would delay, but right now we anticipate spending the part of the fund balance in this fund to get through these 2 years. Solid waste. Okay, the next fund we'll look at is Medic One. The Medic One fund, of course, supports 911 response. That is the sole purpose of this particular fund. The major revenue source, again, is property tax of approximately $11 million. It's calculated much the same as the general fund tax. There is a transfer from the Medic One reserve anticipated to be $1.4 million in 2019 and $3 million in 2020. This is because the taxes collected are insufficient to support the cost of this program. One of the things we see, though, is that the Medic One reserve is slowly spending down, and it is possible, not in this coming year, but within the next 2 years, and we do keep a careful eye on this, that the board will be asked to put a levy increase on the ballot to support Medic One. So that's coming in the future. That is not part of this current budget. The next fund is public health. In public health, the biggest source of revenue is intergovernmental revenues. And this is largely grants from the state of Washington and the federal government that support public health in our county. Charges for goods and services include things like zoning fees that are collected as part of the permit process, the birth and death certificate issuance, public health clinics. There are a variety of ways. I believe that there is some recreation for DD Rec, a very small amount of revenue collected for that. Those are the various types of charges that add up to about $1 million a year. The Public Health Fund also receives a share of the property tax, approximately $900,000, and that amount is solely to be used for mental health and chemical dependency treatment and for services for the developmentally disabled. So it is a restricted use tax. There's other sources of revenue that add up to about $1.3 million a year for total operating revenue of just under $12 million in this fund, which is substantially less than what you saw in this fund in the past. If anyone were to look back over time, you would have seen that this fund had revenue of closer to $40 million a year. What has happened there is the behavioral health organization peeled out, if you will, of the county, and the largest share of revenue that had been for this department went with behavioral health. That was all federal Medicaid, for the most part, federal Medicaid money. So this is a much tighter fund now, and you see much more clearly how much the county actually has to spend for public health services. The next one is still not the right slide on the screen. I do apologize for that. Somehow it's still not working quite right. You have here in the room, you have a separate piece of paper that has the correct numbers on it.
You may want to describe for the public the revisions.
Right. That is exactly what I will be doing. So the changes, ignore what's on the screen. Instead, the revenue sources for the Housing and Community Renewal Fund, there is federal direct housing money that comes from the what's called HUD, Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government, of $3.2 million. We receive state grants from the Department of Commerce of approximately $2.5 million per year. There is a record surcharge fee of $1.8 million, which we're going to double check, but maybe going up, is going.
We'll see it. We kind of projected low, seeing as it's only been in place for about 4 months, and so.
Right, it is a brand new fee recently enacted, is what our finance director from public health is telling us. So we anticipate it'll probably be more than 1.8 million, but we didn't want to overestimate in our projections. We have housing contracts that we collect $353,000 a year from, and then other sources of revenue, which again, broad number of sources, of about $435,000 a year. All of that adds up to total operating revenue of $8.3 million. Anticipated expenditures are also $8.3 million. This fund operates very close to what the revenue is to address housing and other needs in our community. I do apologize that slide, that's the one that's been giving us problems all morning. One of the largest funds in the county is our Central Services Facilities Fund. It is an internal service fund, which means that the customers, if you will, of this service are all county offices and departments. There is no public-facing service that our central service facilities staff provide. They keep the buildings that we work in and that the public visits operational and safe, and us able to conduct business in these buildings to the extent that we're able, considering the age of some of these buildings. So you see a variety of types of revenue that are collected into this fund from other offices and departments within the county. Property management services, that's the funding that's collected specifically to do the upkeep and respond to issues that we have. That is $3 million a year and going up to 3.8 in 2020. Then leases, custodial, mail services. There are a large variety of services that we collect into this fund, approximately 2.2 million. Utilities in all our buildings cost approximately $1.2 million a year. And then there are a wide variety of other services that our staff in central service provides. So we bill that out. It's about another $1.2 million a year. And I would just say that without a place to work, without the lights being able to turn on, without running water, without being able to receive mail, communication and phone, all of these other costs. You can't conduct business without these things. So these are integral, just essential services that are provided on a county-wide basis by a central facility because we get an economy of scale. Being able to do it this way means that we don't have to have a small service in every office and department. We save money by doing it this way. But it does create this interesting revenue and expense stream into this fund. We have additional money in this fund. You see the operating expenditures are about $2 million more in 2019 than the revenue. The reason for that is by state law, an internal service fund cannot collect a profit. So we adjust the rates every year. You'll hear more about that next week. But there is no profit generated in this fund. Storm and Surface Water Utility Fund, the biggest revenue source here is the operating assessment charges that support the work of this fund. You see them now split between CPED and Public Works, and with the largest share coming in to CPED, and we'll talk later about if these fees are, I don't think these fees are proposed to go up. They go up by the CPI every year. So there is, in current county code, a small increase. Other revenue is very small, but we collect what we need to ensure water quality throughout the county in
I think
this
what you
fund.
recall is we're going to have a study to...
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we will be doing a study on these fees to see are they adequate, and there's even a possibility that they would go down in the future. The Environmental Health Fund is one of our top 12. And by top 12, I mean that we collect revenue of more than $5 million a year in the fund. So in our Environmental Health Fund, public health and environmental health fees currently are estimated to collect $2.9 million a year. In a moment, I will talk about the proposed increases for that fund. Other environmental services, we collect $1.2 million a year. Operating transfers from other funds, $1.3 million in 2019. Significantly less in 2020 as anticipated. Others include things like grants, licenses, other types of fees that are collected by our Environmental Health Fund of $1.8 million a year for a total of about $7.3 million in 2019 and $6.1 in 2020. This revenue includes the proposed increase that we'll talk about on a later slide. Okay. Treatment Sales Tax Fund is a sales tax, as its title would indicate. It is 0.1% on the sale of any item that is subject to a sales tax in our state. That is the only source of funds for this particular fund. And the expenditures exceed the revenue because we have over time accumulated a substantial fund balance in the Treatment Sales Tax Fund, and the program has proposed a plan to spend that fund balance down over the next 4 years. So you see in both years spending a little higher than the revenue. Detention facility sales tax, also 0.1% of a sales tax on all goods and services subject. And that fund is used solely for construction and operation of corrections facilities. So we mainly use this fund to cover the costs of part of the cost, not all of the costs, but part of the costs of operating our juvenile detention facility and our adult corrections facility. We also use it to pay bonds that were issued for construction for both of those facilities. And you see the operating expenses are a little more than the revenue. That's because again, we have fund balance, and this is sustainable over time, even though we're eating down fund balance now, because in the next 2 years, the bond payments will be finished and we'll be able to sustain higher costs in operating costs of those facilities. Land use and permitting, am I going the right direction? I think so. So our land use permitting fund is in our CPED. CPED is community planning.
Community development, economic development.
Yep.
Community plan, economic development.
Thank you. And the major source of funding for that department is the Land Use Permitting Fund. In that fund, the greatest source of revenue is from permits, as the title would imply. So these are the different types of permits that they collect fees on. Building structure and equipment type permits. We collect fees to check plans for construction, proposed construction. There are zoning and subdivision fees that are collected. There is an operating transfer from the general fund into this fund that is substantial. It mainly covers the cost of code compliance review. And then there is other revenue, again, grants, other sources of funding that accounts for a small amount in 2019, but a greater amount in 2020, as I believe the increase is to account for fees that will be collected should we implement the Habitat Conservation Plan. So total operating revenue of $5 million in 2019, 5.8 in 2020. Again, this fund has a fairly substantial fund balance, so total operating expenses are quite a bit higher than the anticipated revenues. The last fund that I wanted to mention isn't part of the top 12, but it is an important fund to the county commissioners as we look forward at this budget, and that is our Conservation Futures Fund. It is also funded by property taxes, which is the other reason we need to talk about it today. Property taxes, again, calculated just like the other property taxes are, 1% cap, new construction, refund, you get to your total. The property tax anticipated in this fund is just over $1.4 million. The other amount of money that comes into this particular fund is a share of timber sales, because what happens is when the timber sells, any amount that would have been subject to a property tax is remitted to the county, and this fund collects approximately $30,000 a year in those types of payments. It's just an odd little thing in this fund. This fund has a substantial fund balance, so you see that we are planning to spend about $3.5 million a year out of this fund. That is mainly in the implementation of the Habitat Conservation Plan, where we will begin buying mitigation property using the revenue in this fund. We believe, again, that that will be sustainable over time as other money comes in to be able to pay for that plan.
Before you move on, I have a question real quick. The share of timber sales, how confident are we that that's an accurate figure that we're getting?
$30,000 a year, it's been extremely consistent over time, the money coming into this fund. How confident are we that the amount is accurate?
The amount is accurate, that is being reported this year.
Oh, I believe that that's very accurate. That's from Department of Revenue at the state of Washington. That comes into our treasurers. It's allocated across all jurisdictions that would get a share of the timber money. So
through
I'm-
DNR.
I just,
Yeah,
DNR is the
from
manager's
DNR, yeah.
sometimes I just get a bit dubious, Buckley.
Yeah, we get regular reports on that. I have a high confidence that it's
Okay, thank you.
accurate.
Is the DNR is the one who manages all the timber sales and harvesting.
Right.
All right.
Okay, so those are our funds. Total increase in the property tax levy. Current expense is just another term for general fund. So the tax increase in the budget for the general fund is a little over 1.8 million. The increase in public health is 115,000. The Veterans Fund also receives a share. It's a very small fund, but they will increase by 37,000. So in total, property tax increases that support this budget are a little over $2 million that are calculated under the current expense. Conservation futures is a $15,000 increase. The roads fund is a $660,000 decrease, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And then Medic One is an increase of about $200,000. Now, the road fund decrease, the reason that that is going down is because the board has decided to change the amount of the levy shift. You've decided to, in this proposed budget, part of the proposal is 1.5 million in road diversion. And in 2018, bless you, there was a levy shift that amounted to 1.5 million. In the budget for the next 2 years, in each year, the board has authorized a levy shift of 2.5 million. So that's an increase of $1 million in the levy shift. In the reason you don't see the road fund going down by $1 million is that's partially offset by the increase that they would have seen in the property tax when you do those calculations. But it is a hit to the amount of money that the road fund has available. We will talk a lot more in the budget hearings next week about the road fund and the expenditures in the road fund. But you need to be aware that the amount of money that they're bringing in from property tax is going down. There is a proposed 10% increase in environmental health fees. You held a public hearing on the environmental health fee increase on Tuesday, November 27th. In 2019, it's a 10% increase. In 2020 and future years, it's back to the CPI adjustment as is currently authorized in county code. And this is a list of the different types of fees and permits that would be increased.
I have a question in that
Yes.
regard. At what point do we get an opportunity to vote on this particular issue in regard to having that hearing last Tuesday?
So we will have, you'll have an opportunity this afternoon if you would like to discuss the feedback from the public hearing. The discussion around that would normally be scheduled on December 5th after the public hearings on the budget, and you will need to make a decision on this to give guidance to staff by December 6th on what to include in the final budget adoption resolution. Then you would actually vote on it on December 14th.
Does that same schedule apply to the Transportation Benefit District?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and speaking of the Transportation Benefit District, the proposal in the budget is to collect revenue from a $20 car tab fee The board has not held a public hearing on this particular proposal. We would continue to take public feedback. We've been doing quite a bit of public outreach. What I would suggest to you to give you the greatest flexibility in the future, we'll talk more about this during budget deliberations, but that you place a proviso in this budget that any projects connected to this revenue source be on hold until the board should take action and the revenue actually comes. Which means, should you never take action, or should the board decide to not enact a fee of any type, that we would just not be able to do those projects and, not overspend our fund. So that is a proposal for you to consider. Lake Management District fees are proposed to go up. It's a 3% increase per year in 2019. These numbers are kind of steep as I look at them, but in 2019, the dollar increase for Lake Lawrence would be $874. In 2020, $2,192. In Long Lake, a 3% increase in 2019 would be $5,292, and in 2020, $10,743. So I'm not quite sure how this math worked out. Yes, I will double check the math on the dollar increase, but the proposal is a 3% increase per year.
Yeah, we'll have to check that. That's
Something doesn't quite look right in the math.
Something doesn't add up.
Yeah, so we'll check those. In the meantime, it is a 3% increase that is being proposed. And then I think this is the last of the increases proposed in revenue for this budget is utility district fees. For most of our utilities, it is a 5% increase. And again, I'm going to say that I will double check the math on these dollar amounts. In Boston Harbor, the rate increase is 5%. But 20% for a specific type of service. And we'll check the dollar amounts here, but it is, for the most part, a 5% increase in these fees. It doubles it. Right, it's just the Grand Mound 5% seems pretty high. Yeah, so we're just going to double check these numbers.
It appears to be a cumulative amount, but in reality, the 2020 should be the net increase of the 5%.
Yeah, so we'll check these and have accurate numbers for you this afternoon too, if these turn out, or an explanation of why they are look the way they are.
That applies to all the way down Tamashon and everything there, right? Because they're a little bit out of whack there.
Yeah,
Okay.
the second year seems to be.
Okay.
Well, I understand the cumulative effect that Denise was describing. It's just the Grand Man ones seem particularly high. Yes. Okay. So here is the rest of the schedule on the budget. We're going to hold public hearings on the budget next week, Monday, December 3rd. At 1:30, we'll hear the budget, proposed budget for law and justice. Then at 4 o'clock, general government budgets will be heard. 6 o'clock, you'll have the public hearing on the capital facilities plan, which is generally very short, which is why we'll start the public hearing on the budget at 6:15. And that'll be open to anyone who would like to comment on any section of the budget at the evening session. On Tuesday, December 4th at 1:30, we'll talk about the budgets from CPED and Public Works. At 4 o'clock, Health and Human Services, which includes public health and emergency services. And again, 6:30, we'll hold the public hearing on any section of the budget. This creates the best opportunity for the public to come at any point in time, or to come only for that portion that they're most interested in. And then on Friday, December 14th, you will adopt the next biennium budget. So after the hearing today, your options are, you can choose to increase the property tax levies by 1% and certify them to the county assessor. As you see on this slide, state law requires that the property tax be certified no later than November 30th. And if you don't do that, the penalty is that we cannot collect more than what we collected this year. So that is about $1 million that you would not have in revenue to your general fund. We have received one comment on the revenue. It is regarding the proposed increase in the health department. We'll talk more about this comment this afternoon, but it is basically opposed to the increases in environmental health. That's the only comment that we've received. So I'm not asking that you take any action today. Oh, and again, the action that you take later this afternoon at 2 o'clock, you're scheduled to meet, discuss anything you've heard today, and then the only action that you are asked to take is on the property tax, because you're required to do that by tomorrow. All other actions on these fee increases will be with the budget, so you have more time to consider those. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Questions?
After we have discussion this afternoon, will you have time to make adjustments to your budget presentation based on what we say this afternoon?
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you know about the odd amounts on those various funds?
Well, I'm specifically concerned about those. The public health hearing that we had 2 days ago, and the transportation benefit district.
Okay.
In those 3 categories.
Yeah.
But those aren't coming up this afternoon.
Not for a decision, no.
No.
No,
okay.
for a decision.
But we might have discussion on those issues.
Yeah, you could
Yes.
have a discussion,
Yes.
and you can provide direction. But I will encourage you, because the public is going to be providing public testimony based on the preliminary budget that you approve, and you will be receiving public testimony Monday and Tuesday of next week. So, and you will have the opportunity to make those decisions, final decisions, after you hear the public testimony. But certainly you can discuss how you would like to move forward those particular items, but not necessarily making a final decision.
Okay. Anything else? I would just like to add before we get to the testimony, if there's any testimony, that I'm glad you said this up front, Robin, that I really want to pat not only your staff, but the county-wide staff on the Herculean effort to put this dadgum budget together. It's difficult enough and daunting to do a 1-year, let alone a 2-year, with projected revenues and projected expenditures. So thank you very much. It's a huge workload. And I just want to remind the public that on property taxes, the county only gets to keep 9.5 cents on the dollar, period. And for the gas tax, we get 1/4 of 1 cent is all. Because I hear that, and I wish I could remember how explicitly you described it when I hear people that contact me that say, hey, my property taxes are going up, you guys, but I wish I had it succinct as you do to explain, time out, this is how it works. It's not as simplistic as your values go up, your taxes go up, or your assessment goes down, your appraiser goes down, the taxes go down. Not that simplistic. So thank you for that. Anyway, at this point then, anything else, Romero, Robin? Okay. Then we'll open this up for the public testimony. Is there a sign-up sheet in the back? Anybody signed up on that doggone thing? No one? Okay. But I'll give anybody in the audience a chance to speak to the budget if they want to. Just shake, raise your hand. Anyone? 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 All right. Then with that being done, said, yes?
Commissioner Edwards.
I would like to speak to one other issue, because you brought up the fact of the minimal amount of return we get sometimes on quite large sums of money that are collected. And that is for the public knowledge that whether you agree or not, the citizens in this state have voted that they want to have marijuana available. And to that end, last year, the state collected $14.8 million just in Thurston County, having to do with marijuana revenue. They returned to us $143,000 to deal with all the permitting, the zoning, the enforcement, the courts, everything that goes with it. And I think the public should know what we end up being allotted to us out of what is supposed to be a windfall for the public. And we end up with less than 1%. It's almost as dismal as the gallon of gas that you purchase, in which we end up with 1/4 of 1 cent. So if you ever have an opportunity to talk to your legislative representatives, because we hear about this all the time at this level, and just kind of, if you agree with those figures, fine, and if you don't, you can talk to other people about it. Obviously, I don't agree with the way those are distributed. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
So
Commissioner,
just before, I'm sorry, let me, I would interject that is indeed the amount that we collected last year.
Last year, and
Yes.
I understand that this year they're going to raise that to 2%.
So
I understand.
The amount that we will receive from the state of Washington under current state law, because the legislature changed the amount, is only $400,000, which is still a pittance.
Disproportionate.
Yes, extremely disproportionate to the work that we need to do and the amount that the state receives. So still very small amount, but it has gone up slightly.
Well, I would just like to make sure the public knows my sentiments on
Yes.
this business about trust us, we're working for you.
Yep.
Commissioner Blake, do you have any questions or comments, concerns?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And so what is the pleasure of the board at this time?
You-
Move to close the public hearing or something like that?
If we have no further comment, I would make a motion to close this public hearing today. So, I would so move.
Is there a second?
I'm waiting for a second. All right, I'll second that. And all in favor of moving to close the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned. We're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.